Hi, everybody. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. I'm Deb Philman, mom, homeschooler, educator. I am finally getting around to the last chapter of Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. I apologize. I meant to give these to you in quicker succession. This is the last chapter. It's technically an extra bonus chapter, and it is entitled Against School. So this is where he goes out on a limb, I think the farthest in the whole book, to not only be crystal clear about what the purpose of schooling is in America, not education, schooling. He takes us back in time to give us the facts about how he knows that to be true, and then explains what to do about it. Very briefly, of course, because it will become obvious rather quickly. So he starts off by talking about how, again, reminding us he's taught for 30 years in some of the worst schools in Manhattan and some of the best, but he's spent enough time in a diverse enough range of schools to have the expertise to speak on what schooling is like. So in other words, it's not like he spent his entire 30 years in a single school building where we might be able to say, or tempted anyway, to say, well, that's that school. Okay, he's got the experience and the bird's eye view to tell us what he knows with some degree of authority. And I don't usually appeal to authority, but in this case, I'll make an exception. And he said boredom is just epidemic in schools. And I think most parents out there listening to me, and even some teachers, would agree, yeah, that's pretty true. And it's not just true of the students. It's true of the teachers too. He talks about the, teacher lounge and how, asking people, why they felt bored, how they would blame the kids. And I think we've seen recently from some hot mic moments, they sometimes blame the parents too. They blame the parents for the woes of their job. They blame the kids. I've been a teacher. I know what happens. I've heard plenty of teachers talk about this or that terrible student and how boring it is. I've heard them complain about the curriculum. I've heard them complain about their administrators. I've heard a lot of complaining. But even right before I quit, I didn't see a lot of people pushing back on it. So what he points out is, of course, teachers are themselves products of the same 12-year compulsory school programs that so thoroughly bore their students. And as school personnel, they're trapped inside structures even more rigid than those imposed upon the children. Now, I just made a video this week about this. Who's to blame? And remember I said I put the parents kind of dead last because the parents are just the chronologically aged children who went through the system for the most part. Obviously, some went to private schools, some went to parochial schools, some were homeschooled. I got that. But the vast majority of American children and subsequently adults have gone through this system. So when they then have children, they do so with the expectation they'll go to the school in their zip code, or they'll go to the school for which they're zoned, or someone else is going to take care of educating them, schooling them. And then the population of teachers also went through this system, then go through universities populated by professors who went through the system, and so forth. So everybody is of a sort. And I hate to use the term everybody because, of course, you have your exceptions to the rule always. But let's just say the majority. The majority. I think that's a fair statement. And so he explains even he who grew up in the 40s, had to rely on his grandfather. He didn't get it from school. He had to rely on his grandfather to learn how to tolerate boredom. He wasn't taught in school how to do that, how to self-direct. His grandfather told him. He said he was bored one day, and his grandfather batted him on the head, literally. He told me that I was never to use that term in his presence again, that if I was bored, it was my fault and no one else's, right? So that taught him. He went out and learned how to not be bored anymore. But what has happened culturally as the generations went on and as people tried to deal with things like the advent of the 24-hour news cycle, scaring the living daylights out of parents that their kids were going to be, kidnapped if they were out on their own, running around in the park or going to meet their friends. Couple that with the fact that people were more mobile and moving to neighborhoods they'd never lived in before. They didn't know anybody. Everybody was a stranger. So you can't say, oh, just go talk to the neighbor kids, because now you don't know anyone. You didn't grow up there. When you have all of these things coming together, you have parents literally taught that they should be more vigilant and keep closer watch on their kids. So that's the kids have less adult seeming freedom to make their own decisions about how to use their free time. And as a consequence, they also start to expect that the adults at home are going to supervise the schoolwork they have to do. So they're supervised every moment of the day in their school. They're supervised when they get home or by someone or told what to do, or at least corralled inside the house or put in 18 different activities. So there's always an adult supervising them, and they don't have a lot of autonomy. And they make it all the way to adulthood without really having to make moment-to-moment decisions about how to not be bored. Now add technology, television, video games, cell phones, the internet, Snapchat, and on and on and on. And now add the mindset that being bored is this inherently terrible thing. Okay, being uncomfortable is bad. And we've, of course, now reached the pinnacle of that, right? But being uncomfortable is something you shouldn't be. Good teachers are evaluated on those who engage their students. If the students were having fun in class, because of course they're required to be there. They don't have a choice. They can't opt out. They can't opt out of a given class on a given day. They'll be truant. You have to have a note from the doctor that you're sick, etc. So it's entertain the kids, keep them busy. Blah, blah, blah. Those are the good teachers, not how well they learned. And even if you evaluate it based on that, it was based on a standardized test. Somebody in my locals community pointed out that he, as a grandfather, was so excited when his, grandchild came home and said, "I got an A on my multiplication on my 9s." And he said, "Okay, what's, 9 times 8? And the kid just stared back. Well, I knew it for the test. So you see. So the good teachers are the ones who have the kids who do well on the test and keep them thoroughly entertained and engaged so they don't misbehave, and everybody's hearing laughter and fun, and the kids love them, and it becomes, I'm the fun teacher. And then they go home, and who are the good parents? The ones who are, the kids never get into trouble, and they're always busy, and they're always entertained. I mean, think about it. You want to go to a restaurant, and you look at a table full of kids now, and you see, what are they doing? They're on tablets. They're on phones. But they're quiet. If you'd gone to a restaurant without those things, as I did when my daughter was a baby and even a toddler, I taught her how to sit up straight. I taught her how to be quiet. When she started to cry or get upset, I removed her from the premises, went outside, comforted her. When she could calm down, we came back inside. I learned that from my parents, or from my dad anyway, and my stepmother. But how many people are learning that from someone else? That we've now on our second generation of people going, here, do something at the table, coloring book, play with a toy, da-da-da-da. It's considered good parenting to keep your child constantly entertained. Even to make restaurants built around, here's the TV and we'll put this on. And, oh, you're going to the dentist. Here, watch a movie. There are very few opportunities for kids to be bored and just have to deal. It's almost like a value now, value proposition. I entertain your kids while I, have them in my custody. So you've got parents who are raised to think discomfort of any sort, including boredom, is a bad thing. They're turning around and raising their children the same way. They think it's their number one job is to prevent discomfort. They shouldn't be sad. They shouldn't be depressed. They shouldn't be bored. Of course, boredom is now equivalent with all of that. It's like, they're so bored. What did I do wrong? I even feel it. I will admit, I feel it from time to time. My kids go, I'm bored. And I want to be like my grandfather, who was just like his grandfather, and say, I'll give you something to occupy your time. But when you're dealing with teenagers, good luck. They'll just go, I'm not doing that. So, and where did they learn that? In their years in school. I homeschooled, then they went to school. So that's why I kind of blame the parents last. They went through the system. Teachers also went through the system. But here's the difference. As I mentioned in my last video, the teachers, this is their job. It's their job to make sure the kids learn. Or is it? That's kind of what the chapter talks about. So in the school, the people who get rewarded as the good teachers are the ones who keep the opposition to a minimum, or they have high test scores, or both. Okay. So we reward the people who are very compliant with what the system expects of them. They're compliant. They do as they're told. They don't rock the boat, or they're the super bullies. They are part of the system, and they have adapted so well to the power structure of it that they keep the others in line. They help the administration. They help the system keep the others in line. They're your union shop steward, or your representative, or the sort of head teacher on the block who's just very good at shooting the death glare to the new teachers and making it very clear that they better toe the line, etc. I've been the teacher put in that position to toe the line, and my daughter had a teacher like that who left after 1 year, much to everybody's dismay because she was wonderful. So and sometimes they outright abuse people. He was abused. He colored outside the lines one day with some students and, decided to take them outside the school to do something different than what the curriculum expected of him. And he found out that he not only wasn't granted leave that he'd asked for at a certain time, but when he came back from the leave after fighting to get it, he no longer had a teaching license. He lost his teaching license. And he actually found a school secretary who was willing to testify to watching the entire plot against him unfold. But because he was rocking the boat, they had literally conspired to have him lose his teaching license, and he had to fight to get it back. 9 months of effort it took because he was not towing the line, and that was not going to be okay. So he refers to schools as virtual factories of childishness, because that is childish behavior, right? That's not mature. Being direct with people and saying, this is what we need for you and whatever, and he would have had the opportunity to explain what he was doing. No, you're making us look bad. We're going to hurt you behind your back. And like I said, that happened to me. So I know what happens to people. So the teachers who are in it are sort of like overgrown children. And then how are they expected to help your child mature? Not very easy. And then they go home to parents who were educated the same way, who maybe didn't mature all that well, who grew up with parents who also didn't, and so forth. So you have not just a dumbing down of the curriculum, but you have a coddling, as Jonathan Haidt calls it, a coddling of the American mind, to where you have people who chronologically age, but that's about it. And he says that the problem of schooling, the way he was looking at it as an engineer, was causing him to miss the point. What if there is no problem? What if they are the way they are, so expensively flying in the face of common sense and long experience in how children learn things, not because they're doing something wrong, but because they're doing something right? Okay. Could it be that our schools are designed to make sure that not one of them ever really grows up? And what does it mean to grow up? What does it mean really? It's not get older. It's learning how to delay gratification, learning how to set goals and stick to them even through difficulty, to overcome obstacles, to, fall down 10 times, get up 11, as Denzel Washington once said. These are the markers of adulthood. Doing things we don't like to do, but because we need to do them, because they move us forward towards a goal that is worthy, that advances our success in life. And I don't just mean material success. I mean even our emotional and spiritual and psychological success. We want to have a healthy family, a healthy life, and be engaged in our communities, etc. What do we define success as? And instead, what we've done is we've created a population that it is perpetually needy, just like children, needy in different ways. He says, do we really need school? I don't mean education, just forced schooling. 6 classes a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year for 12 years. Is this deadly routine really necessary? And if so, for what? Don't hide behind reading, writing, and arithmetic as a rationale, because 2 million happy homeschoolers, and of course now it's more, many millions more, have surely put that banal justification to rest. Even if they hadn't, a considerable number of well-known Americans never went through the 12-year ringer our kids currently go through, and they turned out all right. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, someone taught them. They were not products of the school system. Some of them taught themselves. We know that Abraham Lincoln did. They never graduated from a secondary school. And throughout most of American history, kids generally didn't go to high school. Yet the unschooled rose to be admirals like Farragut, inventors like Edison, captains of industry like Carnegie and Rockefeller, writers like Melville and Twain and Conrad, and even scholars like Margaret Mead. In fact, until pretty recently, people who reached the age of 13 weren't looked upon as children at all. That is a relatively new thing. I did my honors thesis in college on the history of higher education in America, which, by the way, pretty much begins in the 1920s, and you'll see why in a moment. And before that, you were an adult well before 18. Well before 18. You were doing adult level things, even working for a living. And people will say today, well, oh no, that's child labor. It's terrible. Well, not if your family is hungry. And you already know how to read and do numbers and do figures, and you need to go to work because your family needs to eat. Then and you're doing it voluntarily. You're not saying like, oh no, I'm a slave. I mean, you could quit theoretically and go do something else, a different kind of job. Point being, we've we've been raised to believe that it's always wrong, when in fact sometimes it's the thing that keeps a family out of poverty and helps them move ahead. And they can be taught in other ways, by the way, not occupying their whole day in a school building. He says, we've been taught, that is schooled, in this country to think success is synonymous with or at least dependent upon schooling. But historically, that isn't true in either an intellectual or financial sense. And plenty of people throughout the world today find ways to educate themselves without resorting to a system of compulsory secondary school that all too often resembles prison. Why then do Americans confuse education with just such a system? What exactly is the purpose of our schools? Yeah, and we'll get into that. But one of the things that I noted is the self-interest. He doesn't talk about it. And remember, this is in 1991 that he's writing this. But looking back, I see it. I see it. And as I said, I did my honors thesis on these colleges. Well, increasingly, as the popularity of colleges exploded in the 20s. Remember, we had an economic boom before the crash. So as the popularity of these schools exploded, so did their desire to appeal to the growing population of children, of students, to get them to go there. Because prior to that, you didn't even need to go to college or university to become a doctor or a lawyer. You could apprentice yourself. You could learn in other ways. They were trying to make themselves relevant like any other business. Don't be fooled by the not-for-profit nature of them. So they had an interest in popularizing this myth that you needed to go to college. Government had an interest in that as well because they wanted to keep more people out of the workforce, especially once the Depression hit and then we had a war and so forth. They wanted to keep people sort of out of the actual workforce longer to make room for people who really needed to be in it, the actual adults who had families, children, etc. And they wanted some more time with these kids to, rough out the edges, smooth out the rough edges if they were doing a little too much thinking for themselves. So we'll keep them another 4 years or 6 or whatever. So there's self-interest there. It's not just for your benefit that you're taught you need to have the secondary school education and you need to have this college education. You need to have all these layers of education because the longer you can be in the company of the experts who are closely tied to the government and get their funding from the government. So there's this lovely little incestuous relationship. And, the more time they have to shape the kind of society they want to have, right? So you might think I'm being conspiratorial, but here's what he says. Mass schooling of a compulsory nature really got its teeth into the United States between 1905 and 1915, though it was conceived of much earlier and pushed for throughout most of the 19th century. Remember I said 1880s, they were like gunpoint, go to school. The reason given for this enormous upheaval of family life and cultural traditions was, roughly speaking, threefold. To make good people, to make good citizens, to make each person his or her personal best. How's that working out for us? Yeah. Fail! These goals are still trotted out on a regular basis, and most of us accept them in one form or another as a decent definition of public education's mission, however short schools actually fall in achieving them, however short they fall. I don't know that we're underground now. I don't know that the bar is in the negative number. So we're not just falling short. It's laughable that these are the goals. When you have people explicitly saying they're trying to create agitators and activists who will fight the system and fight the country and the country sucks. How are you a good citizen then? When you're using other people's money to tear apart the country. And then let's talk about what he says H.L. Mencken wrote in 1924, that the aim of public education is not to fill the young of the species with knowledge and awaken their intelligence. Nothing could be further from the truth. The aim is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed and train a standardized citizenry, to put down dissent and originality. That is its aim in the United States, and that is its aim everywhere else. Because of Mencken's reputation as a satirist, we might be tempted to dismiss this passage as hyperbolic sarcasm. His article, however, goes on to trace the template for our own educational system back to the now vanished, though never to be forgotten, military state of Prussia. And although he was certainly aware of the irony that we had recently been at war with Germany, the heir to Prussian thought and culture, Mencken was being perfectly serious here. Our educational system really is Prussian in origin, and that really is cause for concern. Now, why would that be, do you think? Well, let's take a look, shall we? He says that we kept the very worst aspects of Prussian educational system deliberately designed to produce mediocre intellects, to hamstring the inner life, to deny students appreciable leadership skills, and to ensure docile and incomplete citizens, all in order to render the populace manageable. And again, I'm sure some of you are sitting there going, yeah, but Deb, that's John Taylor Gatto's opinion, and that's Mencken's opinion. And, that's, you really got to find out from people who are actually involved in designing the schools. And, we need some primary source information. You're not really, I still got to take this with a grain of salt. Okay, fair enough. So here he says it was from James Bryant Conant, president of Harvard for 20 years. World War I poison gas specialist, World War II executive of the Atomic Bomb Project, High Commissioner of the American Zone in Germany after World War II, and truly one of the most influential figures of the 20th century, that he first got wind of the real purpose of American schooling. Without Conant, we would probably not have the same style and degree of standardized testing that we enjoy today, nor would we be blessed with gargantuan high schools that warehouse 2,000 to 4,000 students at a time, like the famous Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. Shortly after I retired from teaching, I picked up Conant's 1959 book-length essay, The Child, the Parent, and the State. Is that primary source enough for you? Okay, 1959. And was more than a little intrigued to see him mention in passing that the modern schools we attend were the result of a revolution engineered between 1905 and 1930. A revolution? He declines to elaborate, but he does direct the curious and the uninformed to Alexander Inglis's 1918 book. Now we're at 1918. So we went from 1959 back to 1918. Principles of Secondary Education, in which one saw this revolution through the eyes of a revolutionary. Inglis, for whom an honor lecture in education at Harvard is named, that's the school of education, they teach teachers there, makes it perfectly clear that compulsory schooling on this continent was intended to be just what it had been for Prussia in the 1820s, a fifth column into the burgeoning democratic movement that threatened to give the peasants and the proletarians a voice at the bargaining table. Modern industrialized compulsory schooling was to make a sort of surgical intervention into the prospective unity of these underclasses. Divide children by subject, by age, grading, by constant rankings on tests, and by many other more suitable means, and it was unlikely the ignorant mass of mankind separated in childhood would ever reintegrate into a dangerous whole. Dangerous for whom, you might wonder? English breaks down the actual purpose of modern schooling into 6 basic functions, any one of which is enough to curl the hair of those innocent enough to believe the 3 traditional goals of education listed earlier. Remember, good citizens, reach their full potential, right? Now, I'm going to read these to you in their entirety because I think they're that important. It's going to make this video a little longer, so if you need to pause, check the timestamp, come back, whatever you need to do, but I do need to get this across because it's pretty crucial. I can't really summarize this, okay? Number 1 of the 6, the adjustive or adaptive function. Remember, these are Inglis's book about how to teach people how to teach and about education. Primary source. Schools are to establish fixed habits of reaction to authority. This, of course, precludes critical judgment completely. It also pretty much destroys the idea that useful or interesting material should be taught, because you can't test for reflexive obedience until you know whether you can make kids learn and do foolish and boring things. He's obviously paraphrasing. The function is by its name. Number 2, the integrating function. This might well be called the conformity function because the intention is to make children as alike as possible. People who conform are predictable, and this is of great use to those who wish to harness and manipulate a larger labor force. Number 3, the diagnostic and directive function. School is meant to determine each student's proper social role. This is done by logging evidence mathematically and anecdotally on cumulative records, as in your permanent record. Yes, you do have one. Number 4, the differentiating function. Once their social role has been diagnosed, children are to be sorted by role and trained only so far as their destination in the social machine merits, and not one step further. So much for making kids their personal best. Number 5, the selective function. This refers not to human choice at all, but Darwin's theory of natural selection as applied to what he called. Are you listening? Are you ready? The favored races. In short, the idea is to help things along by consciously attempting to improve the breeding stock. Schools are meant to tag the unfit with poor grades, remedial placement, and other punishments clearly enough that their peers will accept them as inferior and effectively bar them from the reproductive sweepstakes. That's what all those little humiliations from first grade onward were intended to do, wash the dirt down the drain. Number 6, the propedeutic function. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. I apologize. The societal system implied by these rules will require an elite group of caretakers. To that end, a small fraction of the kids will quietly be taught how to manage this continuing project, how to watch over and control a population deliberately dumbed down and declawed in order that government might proceed unchallenged and corporations might never want for obedient labor. That, unfortunately, is the purpose of mandatory public education in this country. Unless you consider Inglis an isolated crank with a rather too cynical take on the educational enterprise, you should know he was hardly alone in championing these ideas. Conant himself, building on the ideas of Horace Mann and others, campaigned tirelessly for an American school system designed along the same lines. Men like George Peabody, who founded the cause of mandatory schooling throughout the South, surely understood that the Prussian system was useful in creating not only a harmless electorate and a servile labor force, but also a virtual herd of mindless consumers. In time, a great number of industrial titans came to recognize the enormous profits to be had by cultivating and tending just such a herd by public education, among them Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. There you have it. Now you know. We don't need Karl Marx's conception of a grand warfare between the classes to see that it is in the interest of complex management, economic or political, to dumb people down, to demoralize them, to divide them from one another, and to discard them if they don't conform. Class may frame the proposition as when Woodrow freaking Wilson, then president of Princeton University. By the way, this was the one cancellation I agreed with, taking his portrait down. I thought that was a good idea. Yeah, he's a horrible person. Said the following to the New York City School Teachers Association in 1909. To the New York City School Teachers Association, very early form of union. We want one class of persons to have a liberal education, and we want another class of persons, a very much larger class of necessity, in every society to forego the privileges of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult, manual tasks. Are you sick to your stomach yet? I kind of hope so. I'm sorry. I don't mean to make you lose your lunch, but I think to get my point across, I needed to read that to you. That was President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. Yeah. So people ask me all the time, who was the worst president we ever had? This dude right here, this one. That'd be my personal opinion. But I mean, I could find things wrong with the prior ones. I mean, Andrew Jackson was kind of, but this guy, no. Sorry, I'm not for saying rule the person out because they did some bad things or had some bad views. Find me the view that he held that was not totalitarian, racist, white supremacist, elitist. Oh gosh, can't find one. Sorry, can't think of a single good thing he did. Really, really can't. So, why did they do this? Well, I just told you. I mean, they were racists. They were elitists. We had all kinds of immigrants coming to this country, and whatever the Statue of Liberty might say, guys like him were not on board with the whole wretched refuse thing. No, not so much. Yeah, you can come as long as you work in a factory. So these were organized to favor, obviously, the large corporation rather than small business. And you might be saying, but then how did small business flourish? And how did this, how did we survive in spite of this? I would argue, as someone who believes in American exceptionalism, is that in spite of it all, we persevered. In spite of schooling, in spite of all of this, in part because the initiative, the mindset of a person, the entrepreneurial spirit it takes to leave your old world home, even if you are being chased by Cossacks, as my great-grandparents were, and cross an ocean or cross a desert or cross whatever to the great unknown, where people, you probably heard stories already about it. People hate you there. They're going to throw things at you. They're not going to treat you very well. They enslaved people for a long time. You sure you want to do this? Yep. I'm going to take my chances. That personality, that's not something that you teach someone to have. They're probably born that way. I'm just going to say it. I get pushback, but I'm sorry. I think that's a kind of inborn quality. And the country was, schooling aside, especially up until, that time period, the country was like, come on. It was rough. It was raw. It was, unwelcoming. But the people who could survive that had a lot going on, right? So that's why I think And then, of course, they would pass that to their children. And as long as communities could flourish, and look, that went on all the way up until his childhood, 1940s. That's a long time, in spite of people like Woodrow Wilson, in spite of the dude. So that tells you something, right? That we made it as far as we did in spite of all this, where people were really like, we got to keep these people in line. There were still people breaking out of it. Okay. So now here's what he said is next. Now, you needn't have studied marketing to know. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped a part. This is super important. He says mandatory schooling was a godsend in terms of creating people who were sort of perpetual children, that they were constantly needy of something, and they weren't very secure, weren't very inner directed. And he says that was tailor-made for this new business called marketing advertising, which, by the way, came into being in the 20s as well. He says, now you needn't have studied marketing to know that there are two groups of people who can always be convinced to consume more than they need to. What are those two groups? Addicts and children, right? School has done a pretty good job of turning our children into addicts, right? Addicts for praise, addicts for other people's attention or other people's good opinion, addicts for, somebody telling them what to do because they don't have any free time to decide anything for themselves. And the thing they did even better than that was turn them into children, perpetual children. He says, again, this is no accident. Theorists from Plato to Rousseau to our own Dr. Inglis knew that if children could be cloistered with other children, stripped of responsibility and independence, encouraged to develop only the trivializing emotions of greed, envy, jealousy, and fear, they would grow older, but never truly grow up. In the 1934 edition of his once well-known book, Public Education in the United States, another primary source by somebody who was devoted to shaping education in America, Elwood P. Cubberley detailed and praised the way the strategy of successive school enlargements had extended childhood by 2 to 6 years already. This is in 1934. My dad's just being born. Okay. Forced schooling was at that point still quite new. This same Cubberley was an intimate colleague of Dr. Inglis. Both were in charge of textbook publishing divisions at Houghton Mifflin. Cubberley is chief of elementary school texts, Inglis of secondary school texts. Cubberley was dean of Stanford's influential School of Education, as well as a friendly correspondent of Conan at Harvard. He had written in his book Public School Administration in 1922 that our schools are factories. It's in a book, guys. He wrote it like this is a good thing. Like, I'm going to write this down. Let me jot this down. This is really good information that I'm not ashamed of writing down at all. Let me tell you what it says. Our schools are factories in which the raw products... Remember I've said on this channel before that your children are the product, not the customer? 1922. It's not new. I didn't just make it up. Raw products, children, are to be shaped and fashioned, and that is the business of the school, to build its pupils according to the specifications laid down. Catching on? It's perfectly obvious from our society today that what those specifications were. Maturity has by now been banished from nearly every aspect of our lives. Easy divorce laws have removed the need to work at relationships. Easy credit has removed the need for fiscal self-control. Easy entertainment has removed the need to learn to entertain oneself, etc., 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 as Yul Brynner might say, but I'm dating myself. Anyway, so moving right along... And he talks about how, we buy televisions that as soon as they're a little too small, we replace them. We buy $150 sneakers when we really don't need them. And this is after starting off as a culture where Americans really didn't want to do that. Where the American sort of intrinsic value, whether it's from the Yankee values of the 1600s to even some of the immigrants who were traveling with what they could carry on their backs, whatever it was like, if I don't really need it, I'm not going to buy it. I'm on a limited budget, whatever. I'm traveling light. I got to move, whatever. I got to be mobile. And we started realizing, no, I can pack it all up in a giant truck. There's storage facilities. I can store my extra stuff. I mean, George Carlin does a great routine on stuff, but we've become the stuff people. We've become giant children. Always have to have more. And, it's not good enough. It's last year's model, new. We've created an entire range of jobs, of careers for people that revolve around making new stuff and convincing people they need new stuff that they don't really need. And how do we convince them they need it? We make them jealous. We make them envious. We make them feel insecure. You get the picture, right? Instead of telling them how to, economize and so forth. And I mean, even the people now who are saying, well, we should be sustainable. So you need to buy from their company to be sustainable. Buy the things you don't need from their sustainable company. Look, it's the thing you don't need, but it was sustainably manufactured, instead of teaching how to fix things. And who kept the lights on and the heat on in Texas over the last week, or got it back on when it went off? Or is it the people who went to college and majored in whatever the heck that could turn them into people who could either go out and agitate in the streets or do marketing for stuff you may or may not need? No. No offense. I was in marketing once, so no offense to everybody who's in marketing. I mean, I'm sorry, but let's face it. This is what we do, or what we did. It was plumbers, electricians, linemen, people who get their hands dirty for a living. So he says, now for the good news. Now that I've thoroughly depressed you. Once you understand the logic behind modern schooling, its tricks and traps are fairly easy to avoid. School trains children to be employees and consumers. Teach your own to be leaders and adventurers. School trains children to obey reflexively. Teach your own to think critically and independently. Well-schooled kids have a low threshold for boredom. Help your own to develop an inner life so that they'll never be bored. Urge them to take on the serious material, the grown-up material in history, literature, philosophy, music, art. In other words, don't dumb down. Don't remove the classics. Don't focus on equity and math. Push them to get the right answer. Because, as I pointed out the other day, we've had, I think, 5 different attempts to land something on Mars, most of which have failed, and some of them have failed because people got the wrong answer. Human error. Miscalculation. Mistakes. Things that come up. Getting it right is something that happens because you focus on excellence, not because you focus on what color or what religion or what ethnic heritage the person doing, or gender persuasion the person doing it has. That has absolutely no meaning in reality. And if you're paying attention to everything I've said, you can start to realize that the better we got, and we did, once we passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, we had effectively made racism, sexism, all these things increasingly obsolete. We had a little ways to go with sexism, but we made these things dying on the vine. So what now? Think about it. The people who are trying to control us and divide us are like, oh, damn, it's not working well anymore. More people are homeschooling. They're not as divided as they used to be. We're gonna be obsolete pretty soon. They can do things for themselves. Oh my God, they can even educate themselves. We created all these wonderful things they don't need, but they're finding new ways to use them so that they can be more independent. What do we do? I know. We'll create a whole new set of genders. We'll create a whole new set of ways they can be offended. We'll create a whole new set of things they should be conscious of that they stop being conscious of, and make them look for divisions and look for offense in every other person and every word. And we'll change the meanings of words if we have to. Whatever we got to do, we got to keep these people divided because, God forbid, they ever really unite against us and figure it out. That would be bad. So, in other words, the good news is, if we're on to them, we're on to them. We can stop doing it. Get our kids away from these people who do not mean them well, who do not care about them, and at best case scenario, are just mindlessly doing this. They've just been so trained to do it, like they don't even realize what they're doing. They just believe in it. They're just completely converted to the faith. Almost like a cult of mindless drones saying, this is what we must do. And when you ask them why, where's the data? Show me how it works. Show me how it helps these children turn into good citizens, to reach their full potential, to be happy. Hello, have happy lives, happy, productive lives for their individual selves. That's selfish. Selfish! Individuals are selfish. You need to be part of the group. Why? What? Okay, tell me how being part of the group is better. Because then we can take care of all the people who have fallen on hard. Well, why would anyone fall on hard times? Why would anyone suffer? Why would anyone need all of this caretaking if your systems work? If it all works so well and people can reach their full potential, and you're not ableist or racist or sexist or genderist or all these things, and then people would be naturally just helping each other. Why do we need this massive centrally planned economy and massively centrally planned everything if your systems work so well? Can you show me the data that shows it's going to work? Racist. You're a racist. That's what your problem is. You're a hater. You know what? I think you might even be a Nazi and a white supremacist. You see how it works? So we've just, he couldn't even probably have imagined how bad it would get. So he says, we suppress genius because we haven't yet figured out how to manage a population of educated men and women. Oh, we have now. We have now, because those who broke free and tried to get educated, we just went to the universities and said, we're going to fill your heads full of fluffy stuff that doesn't matter and doesn't mean anything, and it's like a religion. There you go. The solution, I think, is simple and glorious. Let them manage themselves. Of course. But you got to start with your child, one at a time. And now you might be thinking, but who are my kids' friends going to be? Other people doing it too. They're out there. You can find them. I can help you if you want. Join my locals community. We'll talk about it. We'll figure out ways. We will put our brains together and we will figure it out. We each individually have something to offer to this effort. But thank you for listening. I hope this was instructive. I hope you now understand where I'm coming from on this channel, that I didn't just make this stuff up. It is not just, opinions out of my head. This is coming from the minds and the words of the people who designed the system way back in the way back. So can you see it now? Is there a reason you're still fighting for these schools to reopen? Does it really matter? Shouldn't you be off finding another way any way you can? Yes, you should. I would love to help you out. So again, please consider joining the locals community. I hope to see you there. Have a great day.